Recording is in progress. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar about PTV's RoadEditor. This is Bernd Welter together with Daniel Möwes, and we are working with PTV for a few years now. Let me just introduce PTV to some of you who are not familiar with us. We are located in Karlsruhe in Germany. We have about 800 full-time equivalents worldwide, and almost the whole development is here in Karlsruhe. We have some more colleagues sitting in Paris. We just moved to La Défense, and PTV's core competence is the development of routing, optimization, geocoding, mapping features. We offer these features in ready-to-be-used desktop or browser-based applications, but we also offer the components as developer components to be integrated via standard interfaces such as JSON or SOAP, and in the upcoming or in the new version 2. Whatever, we also offer the REST API for some of the interfaces. And a few words about me. My name is Bernd Welter. I joined PTV almost 20 years ago. My primary task is to establish know-how transfer between various players, whether it's internal players like colleagues in subsidiaries or external players like you partners, developers, and customers, and so on. I'm working together with product management. This is why I'm working also together with Daniel, for example, and I am your interface into PTV's developer core competence. And then we have got Daniel, maybe some introductional words about you.
Hello, also from my side. I'm Daniel Möwes, product manager for the developer components, also known as xServer. So my task from your point of view is mainly having the responsibility over developer components. So all the modules, all the use cases are covered and are ready for you to use. So from the requirements to the shipping, it's all in our product management's hands.
Okay, thank you, Daniel, for the introduction. Well, in the previous in the recent weeks, we discussed about what we want to show you during today's session, what is our personal trigger for this. And obviously, we have some players who are already aware of that there is a RoadEditor, there is a product, a component within a product that you can use for specific scenarios. But on the other hand, we also have some, let's say, new players who are not familiar with it. I've seen both of these categories in the registrations. And today we want to show you what are the scenarios for the RoadEditor, but from a very global perspective. So we don't want to go into details of each and every available parameter. We want you to understand how you can combine the desktop RoadEditor product with, let's say, your xServer architecture. So that's what we want you to understand, so you can see the potential of our expertise of our product. We want to discuss about technological requirements. It's very important for us that you understand how you can integrate and where there are some, let's say, limitations of the architecture where you cannot use it, or where you have to do it in a special way with specific versions of the xServers, maybe only the 32-bit versions or only the Windows versions or whatever. That's what we want you to understand today. We want to discuss about the principles of linking and routing, not in detail, very global perspective once again. And we also want you to provide your expectations towards an interface such as the RoadEditor, because we know that the RoadEditor is, let's say, an existing software, but we are also developing future approaches towards the handling and maintenance of street segments. And this is, of course, why I asked Daniel to join today's webinar, so he can also gather your feedback for this. And he will also present you some statements about future approaches of APIs and so on within the xServers. And of course, we want you to understand how you can fish to get your fish and to, well, a strange metaphor, but we want you to understand how you can use it, and we want you to enable you for this use case. Okay, thank you, Julia, but not right now. So, okay, so much about the goals for today. We also have some no goals. One no goal is we don't want to discuss everything in technical detail. If you want to understand a specific parameter, if you have a very concrete scenario, if you want to discuss about how to parameterize a specific request, please get in touch with your local consultant to get a feedback and introduction into how you can do it in your concrete scenario. As I said, we will not discuss everything in detail. We will not discuss after routing features such as how emission is calculated or toll is calculated. That's not relevant for the way through the street network. That's not relevant. So listing and reporting is not part of today's webinar. And we also do not want to cover additional features dealing with, let's say, extended data like historical speed patterns or live traffic information. That's not part of understanding the road editor, which is today's goal. So let me start with some words about routing. And a very short description. Routing for PTV means you have a big street network, about, I think, 60 million street segments in Europe, for example. And routing means you have a start and a destination coordinate, and you want to find a sequence of segments connected in the network to reach from one coordinate to the other coordinate. And within that list of segments, you have to take care not to violate specific road categories, for example. Sometimes you want to avoid a highway or you want to avoid toll roads because of those segments belonging to a specific street category. So that's on a category perspective. You also sometimes want to avoid specific regions like, let's say, specific countries, or you don't want to drive into limited emission zones in Germany. Then we have some basic settings for the routing. So you specify, for example, the speed values of your trucks, of your resources on the street network, depending on the network categories. We have highway categories, we have urban roads, we have cycle lanes, even walkways, and so on. You can define these basic speed values. We can separate between different categories of cars, for example, or let's say vehicles like cars, trucks, bicycles, pedestrians, and so on. And we also have the need of taking care of specific physical restrictions. So you want to be sure not to drive into a tunnel where your truck is too high for the tunnel, or you do not want to cross a bridge where your maximum total weight exceeds the restriction of the street segment of the bridge, for example. So this is routing in a very rough description. And about these physical constraints, because they will be part of the latest section of today's webinar, is what happens if you do not take care of these physical constraints, for example. So, well, one consequence could be that you have to, well, you're in front of such a bridge or a tunnel and you see, okay, I'm not allowed to use it. I have to turn around to perform a detour. Then you lose time. You have to do additional kilometers. You're getting to your customers, to your appointments too late. You have to pay a fine if you drive through the tunnel in spite of the law, for example, the legal restriction and so on. And these are some of the consequences why most of you who decided to join today's webinar are already aware of. There is a need of a customized handling of street data. You want to add something? Or?
Yes, there is the violation of physical constraints, as you already said. It also applies to legal constraints, that you lose time, pay a fine, miss appointments due to the shift of the delivery chain. But those physical and legal constraints should be already covered by PTV provided data. So that is not exactly the point. It's when you exceed those requirements, those physical requirements or legal requirements.
Okay, thank you. So, so far we discussed about the generic approach of routing. In the next slides, I want to introduce you into various let's say, levels of flexibility of these approaches. For example, the basic routing, standard routing in xRoadServer takes care of the data which is part of what we call the regular binary map. So it's, let's say, a premium map of Europe City containing these 60 million street segments with their core attributes such as network category, the length of the segment. We derive the speed on a specific segment, or the time you need to take for a segment is derived by the length of the segment and the network classes, for example. And there is some more basic categories of basic attributes like whether such a segment is blocked for trucks or for cars. This kind of blocking is already part of the standard binary map. It does not require the truck attributes that we're talking about in a few seconds. So that's sufficient information for a standard routing, including fast cars, slow cars, on a very rough level. This is without roadEditor, without track attributes, just with a binary map and regular routing profiles.
Without any additional information, additional data, just the base map.
Okay, so, well, this is a routing you can also consume from other companies in the market, like Google. Yeah, if you do go to Google Maps, you can calculate a routing based on such data. But then you might also need additional information to be taken into account. For example, you want to take care of mainly legal, not only, sometimes it's custom requirements, but mainly it's legal aspects, like not driving over elements where you're forbidden due to some regular paragraphs, which could be the case either because of values of your vehicle compared to segments attributes. For example, your truck has a specific weight, has a specific height, and on a segment you have a maximum height, or you have a maximum weight which is allowed on this kind of segment. And this is what we provide with additional, still standard data, but it's additional to the binary map. And the second category on this data is the, let's say, the Boolean driven value. So you belong to a specific category, like you are carrying hazardous goods, or you are carrying water polluting goods, and on a specific segment you have the information you are not allowed to drive here if you belong to one of these categories. So that's just a Boolean approach. And finally, there is a third dimension on these aspects, and the third dimension is just the time dependency. For some of these segments, there might be a need of, or a restriction, such as you're not allowed to drive on this segment during rush hour, for example, or during specific weekdays or whatever. That's quite important. And in that context, we're talking of what we call time dependency. So that's the second approach. Remember, binary approach, binary basic data. Second approach is truck attributes, standard data provided from PTV. And now it comes to roadEditor. Now it comes to customizing data to your requirement. You want to change the attributes of street segments because your own understanding of a segment is different from our standard. For whatever reason, maybe you get feedback from a truck driver who tells you, I was directed into a specific city on a specific street, but when I was there, I saw there is a sign that tells me you're not allowed to drive here, for example. And this is when it comes to customizing data. With customizing data, you can maintain your interpretation or your conditions of street segments. You can select the segments in the map, and you can give them attributes, different values, and so on. Of course, you cannot draw new segments. It's all about changing the attributes of existing segments, not about inserting new segments. So what you can do with the roadEditor, this is already a small screenshot of the interface. Later on, I will open the desktop product itself and give you some examples. You can change these attributes by selecting the segments in a map control and then applying those attributes that you can see here in this little control. So, and What is also very important, Daniel told me several times, we want you to understand if there is a legal constraint, for example, which is missing in our truck attributes in the second approach. It could be a temporary solution to use the road editor to cope with it, but please tell our support, tell us about that there is some gap in the data, because we want to forward this information, which is very important, to our data provider so they can add your feedback into the next binary map.
Yeah,
it's very important.
Yeah, this information is important to us and should be covered by the standard. That's not a use case why you should use the road editor. It's more like, for example, the street condition, which is not covered by the map data or even the extended data. When you say, I know these streets better, and I know that the condition of a proper a street is not so that I can pass it with my lorries, or the corner is shaped that I cannot pass it, even if I could do it legally. So you can then block it for just this type of vehicle for your use case.
By the way, thank you for that feedback, Daniel. We mentioned the legal aspects, we mentioned the geometry aspects of your trucks. For example, if you have another use case where you say, oh, we have another constraint or another requirement for using this kind of editor interface, just let us know. That's what we ask you to give us as a feedback, as a requirement during today's session.
Or after the session.
Yeah, of course, at any time in the chat or also in the forum afterwards. So this was a rough, for the moment, this was a rough overview of the 3 different levels: standard binary map, truck attributes, and road editor. Time to take a deep breath for us now. Time for you to ask questions, whether you have questions so far. So we give you just a few seconds to ask the questions in the chat or in the Citrix questions section. If not, then we will proceed in a few seconds. By the way, maybe time for me to just show you the road editor interface for a few on a very quick glance. So there is a map control. Here on the left, we have some selected segments. You can see these attributes of these segments. As I said, we will not go into details today, but what you can see, for example, is there is some validity period for some of these segments. These changes have to be taken into consideration after July the 31st, for example. Some of these segments are blocked for hazardous goods, for combustibles, and maybe even for trucks in general.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I'm sorry, the interface is German, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. And we will describe the functionality also in the slides. So
yeah. Okay, so there was only one feedback in at the moment, and that was everything is clear to now. Thank you very much. That's also very good to know. Thank you. Okay, then let's move on. So as you've seen, there is the road editor software for you who haven't used it so far. The road editor is a part of our approved PTV Map&GUIDE desktop, which is a standard desktop Windows program that you can use for, let's say, simple routing of one truck at the time. It also covers use cases like simple sequencing. What it does not cover is tour optimization. But the main use case for Map&GUIDE desktop is standard routing with various approaches and with a with a desktop front end. You can click into the map, change waypoints in the map, and so on. And one of these sub-elements of the road editor of Map&GUIDE desktop is a specific use case here. So the standard use case is the routing. You can collect addresses as stations in a map and so on, and then calculate a route. But there is also a specific use case which is called road editor, and that's the topic for today. What can you do with a road editor? How can you benefit from this interface in combination with the xServers. So the MAP&GUIDE desktop product is established in the market. It's important that you understand it's a desktop product. It's not a browser-based approach, because in the future...
And also there's no mobile app for it?
Yes, in the future, or let's say state-of-the-art approaches would be web-based, maybe, but as we have it right now with the RoadEditor as it is a desktop application. So it runs under Windows platforms only. There is no Linux version of this software. And it is a 32-bit software. You can run it in a 64-bit operating system, but it's limited in its features due to 32-bit scope of the libraries we use in it, for example. So yeah. We are aware that state of the art is different. Yeah, we know that you want to have 64-bit. We know that you want to have approaches you can use also from other operating systems. We are aware of also the answer to this, and we are aware of that you want to have different approaches, like even an API instead of a control, for example.
Yeah,
that's on Daniel's
scope. That's the last sentence. These restrictions are subject for future developments. That's also why I am here, to gather information about the requirements, like mobile usage.
So let me just for a second get back to one of the questions we received in the chat. One participant asked, can a driver register road attributes on a mobile app, for example? So that sounds a bit like the OpenStreetMap approach. The community wants to feed us with feedback about legal constraints and so on. Currently, there is no, let's say, no interface for this. You have to provide that kind of information to support, and then we will forward it to our data providers. There is no automatic mechanism like a reporting portal or something like that. Sorry for that. That's it, as it is right now. Daniel, feedback about it? Or okay, then I will proceed. So when you have now it comes a little bit more technical. When you have the MAP&GUIDE installed in your desktop environment, for example, MAP&GUIDE has access to the binary map, as remember in approach number 1, standard binary map, but it is also connected to an additional database. In that database, we maintain the changes on the segments that you have updated, applied in the front end. So when you select some of the street segments, like I did, and then you apply, this is from now on, it will be blocked for trucks or for water polluting transports, for example. This has to be stored in an additional database, which is located outside the binary map. And this additional database is either Microsoft Access for, let's say, local single user approach, but you can also use it in a large environment, in a distributed environment, shared with other users, and then you can use a Microsoft SQL Server installation. We provide scripts that you can use to create the tables if needed, and so on. And then you can have several installations of the desktop MAP&GUIDE RoadEditor being connected to one shared database. Yeah, so it's quite important. So it's Microsoft-driven, as the desktop product itself, Windows-driven, it's Access or it's SQL Server. So now this access has, of course, it has to be read-write access. You have to change content of the database. On the other hand, you have the consumer of this information. You have the xServer. You want to connect an xServer to the RoadEditor database, but only in read-only mode. So the xServer is not writing information back to the database, but it consumes the additional information from the database and reflects it immediately. So when you press apply here, somewhere here in the desktop interface with a change, this change will be performing an update in the RoadEditor database, and the next read access from the xServer will already reflect the new conditions. So this is, of course, what everybody wants to have. Save in the administrator front end, reflect that new information or conditions in the reader context, in the consumer front end. What is important, what we want you to understand is this is only working with the 32-bit version of the Windows X root server. It's not working with Linux. It's not working with 64-bit versions, unfortunately. It's what we call historically grown. So the benefit, of course, is you can use this kind of architecture, what is called a strong coupling. It's a strong connection between consumer and administrator as they use the same resource database on the fly. That's why we call it a strong coupling. You can use it even from a separated machine. So your X route server can be located in your hosting center with access from outside, while your administrator front end is located inside on various desktops. And what is also important for you to understand is when you create a routing with xroute by a request, this will create information in the scope of the xroute server. It will create what we call a binary file, a binary layer. And some of you might know this binary file because it's the same file definition, the same structure as within our truck attributes, as the attributes we provide as static data, let's say once per map version.
Yeah, that's the RoadEditor formatted truck attributes. That's why they're called RE truck attributes. Nowadays, we also provide truck attributes in the feature layer technology, but formally or until now, and not until now, and now we provide truck attributes in both formats. One is the RoadEditor truck attribute format, and that's the same format as is created when you use the RoadEditor with a database approach internally by the xroute itself.
Yep. So what is possible with this approach is also that you specify start time via the API of xroute. So you can tell the X server, and the X server can tell the RoadEditor layer, I want to do this route on, let's say, August the 25th, and then it will consider only the blockings that apply on August 25th according to the conditions in the database. That's a very important difference compared to the other approach, which we will show you in a few slides. So that's a big benefit if you have this strong coupling. On the other hand, there is also a limitation. So what you cannot do with this RoadEditor database is you cannot show your own truck attributes based on the strong coupling on a map. That's not possible, unfortunately. So you can use it, they will appear in the routing context, but you cannot see them on the map. So both, let's say, both interfaces at the same time. On the left side, the administrator front end, on the right side, the consumer front end with read-write access and read-only access. So you can, I hope you can understand that they both have a binary map. By the way, for MAP&GUIDE desktop, the binary map has to be on the local environment because MAP&GUIDE uses the map server, which is also, let's say, an approved product from the PTV developer portfolio. And on the other hand, you have an X server, which could be on a different machine, but still requires the same version of the map. So if you're using a 2018.2 here map on the MAP&GUIDE front end, then you also have to use the 2018 here map in the X route context on the other side, on the consumer. So much about the strong coupling. So another time for you to ask questions about the strong coupling, about the connection to the database. Any questions so far? In the meantime, I will just open some test front ends and show you the consequences of some of these changes. And Daniel is having a look at the
of course
at the chat. So here, for example, I have edited some of these street segments. Why can't I see the changes, by the way?
Just click on the segment in the list.
And then I can see them. So these are some changes I made to these segments, and they are forbidden for water polluting goods, for example. So this is just stored in my user front end. I can also select several of these segments at the same time, but then I have to use a specific trick of the front end. Oops. Just a second. So here we are. So I can select several segments at the same time. What is it? So now we have several segments, even including bicycle tracks through the woods, and then I could change the values of these segments. Now, as you see here, some of these segments have the changes applied after July 31st. And here I have a test front end which uses my local, which uses my local installation of my xRoute server, 32-bit. Here you can see the standard route. If I drive on that, let's say, street with the current parameters, you can see that the geometry is driving over these segments through the woods, and in the output of xRoute server, you can see that I'm using several segments, 7 of them, who have specific attributes. Attributes means hazardous to water, hazardous to goods. And here the numbers behind it give you information about whether it's in, well, it makes no sense, but it's just a demo, whether it's in driving direction or against, not driving direction, whether it's in data direction or against data direction. So I can also specify that I am carrying hazardous goods, that I am carrying heavy load. And when I do this, I do no longer drive through the woods. I just take a detour through the other region. And if I change the data condition in my map, for example, by simply deleting these records, data records, here we go, including this one, then the routing, oops, still storing. Oh.
That's not really a segment.
Whatever it is. What is it?
It's nothing. It's 0 meters.
Is it one in the woods? Okay. However, let me try to calculate the route again. And then once again, it drives through the woods, and in the output we see that there are no segment attributes on these segments now anymore, because I just stored them in the desktop in the database. Okay, let's have a look at the chat. No questions in the chat, so we can go on with the demonstration. Oops, I'm deleting some of these contacts. Okay, so besides the strong coupling, we also have a loose coupling. The loose coupling is a bit, let's say, I wouldn't say less flexible, it's different. It's just different. And one of our goals is for you to understand the differences between these two approaches, so you can decide which one matches your own environment. So the difference is that you can use a specific part of the map&guide front end, which is located here, which is the final thing. Even in German, it's a layer export. You can create the binary file that we have been talking about on the fly. So you can create the binary file and provide it to your xServer, which is not connected to the database. But this is also working with the 64-bit version, and it's also working with the Linux version. You can create your own binary file, export it according to the observation timestamp, which is mentioned here in map&guide. So this blocking, for example, which applies on July 22nd and after that date, will not be part of the export because it's not matching the observation timestamp. That means this segment will not appear in the binary file. So it will just not be in the file because the binary file does no longer have access to time-dependent information. It just contains segments that are valid or not valid at a specific point in time.
Yeah, at a snapshot. And this a use case for this kind of coupling is when you have specific blockings you want to apply every time and any time, then you can create a layer like that in your desktop application, export it, deploy it in your xServer environment, and just use it. And then those segments are blocked every time. You won't, it gets considered in your routing. You can also display them in your XMap. That's the other advantage. And
so it would look like this.
Right, it will look like there's a sign on the map, and it will look like that, like a standard truck attribute. And you're independent from your deployments. You don't need to have a constant database connection.
Exactly. So that's about the loose coupling. So another diagram of the loose coupling is you have your administrator environment, which is completely, let's say, disconnected from the consumer environment. On your administrator environment, you create the binary file, you create a layer export, then you provide the file, you copy, move the file to your consumer environment, the xServer environment, and then you can use it in the xServer. But it's no longer useful to apply a start time of the road editor in the consumer, because whatever is part of that binary file will be part of the routine.
And maybe it's interesting for other situations, but it won't be considered for this specific layer.
Okay, so so much about the loose coupling, and now we just want to sum up those limitations for you. First limitation is the xRoute server is able to take care of binary and database approaches if the operating system version is matching. The second restriction or limitation is that XMAP server is able to deal with binary files, but only with binary files. The third limitation is that binary files are not covering the use case of dynamic time dependency.
Yeah, they only mirror a certain point in time.
Then we have the limitation of the database approach, because there is only 32-bit drivers for the Microsoft JDBC environment. We cannot use these drivers in Linux environments, and we cannot use them in 64-bit environments. So database approach is restricted to xRoute Windows 32-bit.
Due to the supported ODBC drivers. If you want to do something by yourself, we won't stop you. But that's the official ODBC limitations we need to apply here.
Okay, that's a bit out of my scope of technology. I don't know what is the limitation behind that, why we don't have drivers for this.
Yeah.
But it's just the state of art. It's not possible with the 64-bit versions, and it's not possible with Linux versions. The next limitation is that the binary files and the database approach, none of these two approaches will be considered in the future architecture or in the xServer 2 architecture. It's not future, it's already here. But we will not integrate these two approaches into the xServer 2 framework. Everything which is part of the xServer 2 will be based on feature layer. That's our big magic container for any kind of future development and current development. And the last limitation we want to sum up on this slide is that we are not supporting the merging, or let's say we are not supporting that you apply feature layers and binary files and road editor database files, a database approach at the same time. You can use feature layers in xServer 1, but then please do not use truck attributes, binary files, or database approach, or you can use binary files or database approach, but then do not use feature layers. And I know some of you are listening very careful right now, because they want this. They want to combine time-dependent feature layer standard data, like feature layer truck attributes, with their own customized information. And that's not supported. That's not a product feature. So if you do it, it's on your own risk, and we cannot solve it. We cannot provide a solution for this. It's very important.
Yeah, and it's important for me to note that we don't support that. We don't test that. When you configure it, so using your own road editor binary file with your blockings and feature layer, it might be technical. It might run them, and it might apply a routing to it, but we don't support it and we don't specify how it behaves. So that's the limitation here.
Okay, then let's go on with next slide. So the current status, to sum up this as well, is we will develop new features based on feature layer. Forget about the old approaches. They are approved, they are working fine with xServer 1, but if you want to apply something in xServer 2, you have to focus on feature layer. The implementation of these existing approaches in xServer 1 is quite well. You can do a lot with it, but you cannot migrate from xServer 1 to xServer 2 using the same approach. Only if you work with feature layer.
Yeah, so you cannot apply your RoadEditor binary or your database or can't use it in xServer 2. That's what we already had on our slides. In xServer 2, that's the gap for the moment. So we don't have a RoadEditor technology available for xServer 2 since we don't support the RoadEditor file format. But this additional content we do have in the xServer 1, like the RoadEditor truck attributes, that's the extended data for the binary maps, is covered by feature layer truck attributes with additional information, with more attribution, since the inherent limits of the RoadEditor format. The live traffic use case, which is also in a specific format in xServer 1, is covered by PTV traffic incidents, which are already working on xServer 1, as well as the feature layer truck attributes are working on xServer 1. And the last thing is the historical traffic data, also called Ganglinien in German. That's covered by PTV speed patterns or truck speed patterns, also even in xServer 1. For now, the historical binary format in the old format is not provided anymore. So this won't be available, is not available anymore in the old format. It's just the PTV speed patterns.
So one benefit, just a little side note, one benefit of these feature layers is you can just apply several of them at the same time. What you see in my mapping interface right now is I have applied the historical information. This is why you can see the green and orange bars on the sides of the road, which indicate that, let's say, the level of impact on the historical traffic conditions on a specific day of the week, on a specific time of that day of the week. And what you can also see here is the truck attributes. These truck attributes are, for example, have a look at the highway over there from north to south. Some of these truck attributes are eastern and western of the highway. If I show you the content, let me just deactivate the historical information. If I apply the truck attributes, standard truck attributes, at the same time, you will see that they are only covering some of these feature layer based truck attributes. And the reason for that is that these truck attributes in the feature layer, they have some kind of a time dependency.
Yeah.
And as this time dependency cannot be handled by the binary file, by the, let's say, traditional RoadEditor approach, this is why they do not appear on the map, because they are not part of the binary file, these specific limitations. Okay, that was just a side note. Any questions so far about what we just explained before we come to the next section, the future?
I think it's clear so far.
I hope so. Okay.
Yes, it is.
Then let's just.
It's either clear or all are asleep.
Okay, then let's just proceed. Okay, the next thing is, what would be the perfect environment to work with, let's say, the introductional use case of customized data? In a perfect world, you would be able to handle your own feature layers content. You would not depend on operating systems or bit depth of operating systems or components.
That's a self-regulating problem, because the 32-bit is not supported for far on operation system level and also on xServer level. I think the time is limited. You can use 32 bits.
Okay, so the next big buzzword is time dependency. You want to be able to specify a very flexible approach towards time dependency, like regularities, on what days of the week will specific blockings be applied and so on. This will be part of the perfect world. Then we have the potential to combine PTV's standard data with your own customized data. And as you can see on the checked markers on the left side, we are already able to deal with these topics, not with custom feature layers like you can change the content on your own, but with feature layers.
It is possible in theory. The xServer can handle any feature layer. You can stack them, you can combine them. The problem occurs further down when it's the topic of creating them.
So, okay, then that comes, that leads us to the last 3 points on this slide. So in a perfect world, you would have a tool chain that enables you to change the content of your, let's say, feature layers, containers, whether it's with a user front end with controls or with an API where you can call web calls, JSON, REST, whatever. That's on our roadmap. It's not available right now. In a perfect world, you could use all these things in a distributed environment as well, and you can use it also with, what's that word?
Someone typed an A wrong.
Okay. Okay, so we do arrows, yes. And you can use it in a shared environment as well. So that would be a description of the perfect environment. So do you have further requests, further constraints or let's say conditions you would like to be considered? Then let us know.
Or simpler. It's good. It also could be simple.
Okay, and in the meantime, I will just proceed with a little summary about the feature layer. Remember, feature layer is already available. The technology, the definition of the file is already available. What is not available so far is the maintenance APIs that would enable you to change the content of such a feature layer. That's on our roadmap, but it's not available so far. We do not have a maintenance front end as well in 2018. But what we can offer to you, your special opportunity today and in the next weeks and months is, if you have data, static data, which is not changing, let's say within the next weeks or month, then you can provide that data to us. We can evaluate whether we can create, let's say, a custom feature layer for you. We will estimate the efforts and make you an offer on under what conditions we can create such a file in a context of a project. So just once for a specific map and so on. Then please get back to us if you have this kind of custom data.
Of course, this static data can be time dependent.
Yes, of course, because that's part of the feature layer.
And we do have a question, what kind of API do we plan? It's not yet fully specified, but we will first work on an xServer specific API, like a SOAP and JSON API. It's not a REST API is not planned to due to the wide use case of custom feature layer.
So does it mean we will have an xRoadEditor maybe, or
no? Use cases in xServer environments usually consists of different xServers using in combination. So the RoadEditor use case from the RoadEditor use case from xServer point of view could be look like something. You want to select segments, so you need some kind of selection or you need a selection method, like a point next segment selection, or a selection in form of a route or an area.
Segment IDs, rectangles.
Whatever, a selection criteria. And second, you need to apply the segment attributes. So you need a list of attributes to apply on them and the method to apply it on a list of segments. So the combination of the selection you make with the attribute you want to apply is another method. And the third one is we need to store it somewhere, and we need to manage it somewhere, like you manage nowadays your distance matrices or high performance routing networks. We need something to store it, to list it, to manage it, to use it. Okay, so it will consist of a sequence or of different calls to apply the whole use case. And if I think it from the xServer point of view, if you think it from an UI point of view, of course you want this UI covering the use case in the background with its own business logic. So,
okay, so that's still in discussion, in design phase. You'll have probably a picture in your head, and we will wait for your output then, of course.
And okay. It will grow slowly. That's also the point of our offer. Of course, we as PTV are able to create feature layers. That's why we are able to offer you and to provide you the different kinds of feature layers. And so if you have urgent needs and you just want to cover your static blockings and don't have to bother with this MAP&GUIDE desktop software every time, we could talk about that and take it as a project.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so that was the block with the section in the presentation dealing with the future, what is about to come. Any questions about future approaches or recommendations or hints or feedback about this? Then once again use the chat or get back via the questions, as at least one of you did during the webinar several
or
times.
If you do have questions in the follow-up, just contact us in form of either in person, Bernd, or consulting staff, or of course ask your questions in the forum, or just note your requirements. It will also be parsed to me, of course.
Definitely. It's about future aspects, and I will hand over the topics to Daniel. If it's about how you can do something with the existing architecture right now, then I will try to take care and maybe offer one-to-one web sessions to have a closer look at your own installation environment. And by the way, if you need an installation of the desktop MAP&GUIDE with the RoadEditor, please get in touch with your sales representative at PTV and ask for the test version. Yeah, so much for today. That was a lot of information in a very short time. I hope we give you the information that matches our goals and your goals, of course, because your goal is our goal. And we're looking forward to your feedback after the show. And thank you very much for your attention. Okay, there is one more question. Let me see. That was. Okay, then we are done. Thank you very much and see you soon.
Also, thanks from my side and see you.
Bye-bye.